He grabbed her arm so hard she felt the bones shift. Not a warning, not a threat, a message delivered in front of 30 people who all looked away. Emily Carter had one rule: keep her head down, keep her job, keep her brother alive. She broke that rule tonight, and now her manager was dragging her toward a hallway with no cameras and no witnesses, and nobody in that room was going to stop him. Nobody, except the man in the corner booth who hadn't touched his wine in 20 minutes. He'd been watching her all night. Shanam. Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the night Emily Carter started a war she never meant to fight. The Bella Naughty was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was always soft and the smiles were always practiced. Marble floors, white tablecloths, a wine list that cost more than Emily made in a month. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. But the tips were good, better than the diner on 5th, better than the late-night pharmacy counter where she worked Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and her brother Marcus needed another round of physical therapy starting next month. So Emily Carter smiled, tucked her notebook under her arm, and worked every single shift they gave her. 3 jobs, 22 days without a full night of sleep, and not one word of complaint. That was who she was. Quiet, careful, invisible, until tonight. Table 9 was an elderly couple, the Hendersons. Emily had served them twice before. The husband always ordered the salmon. The wife always asked for extra lemon. They tipped 17% exactly every time, like they'd calculated it on a calculator before leaving the house. Emily loved them for it. There was something honest about people who knew exactly what they were doing and why. She brought their check at 8:43. Mr. Henderson put on his reading glasses and looked at it the way he probably looked at everything in his life, carefully, thoroughly, without rushing. Then he frowned. "Excuse me, sweetheart," he said, and his voice was the kind of voice that belonged to a man who had once been in charge of something important. "There's a charge here I don't recognize." Emily leaned over to look. Service enhancement fee, $300. She felt her stomach drop. She knew what that was. She'd seen it before twice in the last 3 weeks, both times on bills for elderly customers, both times on Frank Dawson's section of tables. A charge that appeared from nowhere, attached to nothing, collected and pocketed before anyone noticed. Emily had noticed. She'd written it in her notebook: dates, table numbers, amounts. Not because she planned to do anything about it. She wasn't stupid. She just couldn't stop herself from writing things down. It was a habit from childhood, from a mother who always said, if you see something wrong and you stay quiet, you become part of it. But staying quiet was survival. She looked at Mr. Henderson's kind, confused face. She looked at the charge, and something in her chest snapped. "One moment, sir," she said. "I'll have this corrected." She found Frank Dawson at the host station, scrolling through his phone, looking bored in the way that only people with power ever look bored, like the world was waiting for them, not the other way around. Frank was 41, broad-shouldered, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd been manager at Bella Notte for 6 years. He wore that tenure like armor. "Table 9's bill has a service enhancement fee," Emily said, keeping her voice low. "They didn't order any enhanced service. I'm going to remove it." Frank didn't look up from his phone. "Leave it." "Mr. Dawson, it's $300 there." "I said leave it, Carter." He said her name the way people say words they don't respect. Flat, dismissive. Emily thought about Marcus, about the therapy bills, about the job she needed to keep. Then she thought about Mr. Henderson putting on his reading glasses, about the careful, honest way he'd looked at that number. "That's theft," she whispered. The word hit the air like a stone hitting glass. Frank looked up, and the smile disappeared. What happened next took 4 seconds. Frank pocketed his phone. He stepped forward. His hand closed around Emily's upper arm, not a touch, not a guide, a grip, and he started walking. "We're going to have a conversation," he said, and his voice had dropped to something that didn't need to be loud to be frightening. In private, he was steering her toward the back hallway. The one near the kitchen entrance, past the coat check where the overhead camera had been broken for 11 days, and everyone knew it and no one had reported it. Emily's heart was slamming. Her feet were moving because they had no choice. He was bigger than her by 100 pounds, and his grip on her arm had already started to leave something behind, She could feel it, the deep ache of pressure that would be a bruise by morning. Around them, the restaurant continued. Forks clinked against china. Someone laughed at a joke. A busboy moved through tables with a water pitcher, eyes down. Nobody looked. Nobody moved. That was the rule of Bella Notte, unspoken, but absolute. You do not get involved. You do not make it your problem. You keep your job. Emily knew that rule better than anyone. She'd followed it for 7 months, and she was about to disappear into a hallway with no cameras, with a man who was currently bruising her arm in front of 30 witnesses who had all decided they didn't see anything. Let her go. 2 words, quiet, steady, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it has weight. The room didn't just pause. It stopped. Frank stopped. Emily stopped. Even the busboy with the water pitcher stopped and looked up, which meant something because that kid had the practiced invisibility of someone who'd been trained to never look up. The voice had come from the corner booth, the one near the east window, half in shadow, separated from the rest of the dining room by the natural geography of the space. The booth that the staff had quietly, nervously left empty all evening, setting it with fresh linens and a candle, and 2 menus that no one ever opened. Because there was already someone sitting there. He'd been there since 7:15. Emily had noticed him when she came on shift. You couldn't not notice him, even though he seemed to want you to. 50s, maybe older, though it was hard to say. Dark suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open exactly 1 button, silver at his temples. A glass of Barolo untouched for the better part of an hour. And eyes dark, still patient, that had been moving around the room the way surveillance moves. Systematically. Missing nothing. She'd assumed he was waiting for someone. Now she wasn't sure he'd been waiting for anything except this. He hadn't stood up. He was still seated, one arm resting on the table, the other relaxed at his side. He wasn't performing. He wasn't threatening. He was simply the stillest person in the room. And he was looking at Frank Dawson the way a man looks at something he has already decided. Frank's grip on Emily's arm didn't release immediately. For 3 full seconds he held on, calculating, weighing, trying to figure out what he was dealing with. Then his hand opened. Emily stepped back. She didn't run. She wouldn't give him that. But she put 2 feet of distance between herself and Frank Dawson, and she held that distance like a wall. Mr. Moretti, Frank said, and something had changed in his voice. The confidence had developed, a crack, thin but visible. This is an internal matter, a staff issue. I apologize for the disturbance. Bring the check for table 9, Daniel Moretti said. The corrected one. Not a request, not even close. Frank's jaw tightened. A muscle moved in his cheek. For a moment, one very long moment, Emily thought he was going to push back, to reassert something, to remind this man, whoever he was, that this was his restaurant, his floor, his rules. Then Frank turned to her. Fix the bill, he said, and his voice was perfectly flat. My mistake. He walked away. Emily stood there for 3 seconds, which was how long it took for her legs to stop feeling like they belonged to someone else. Then she went to fix table 9's bill. Mr. Henderson thanked her with the careful dignity of a man who had understood exactly what had just happened and chosen not to embarrass her by acknowledging it directly. His wife reached out and briefly touched Emily's hand, said nothing, didn't need to. Emily made it to the server station before her hands started shaking. She pressed them flat against the counter, breathed, once, twice. She could feel it, the place on her arm where Frank's grip had been. Tomorrow that would be purple and green. She'd worn long sleeves before. She could do it again. What she couldn't do was stop thinking about the man in the corner booth. Daniel Moretti, Frank had known his name. And Frank Dawson, who talked to everyone like they owed him something, had said that name like he owed this man everything. 30 minutes later, the restaurant had thinned. The Henderson couple left 17% like clockwork. 2 tables of business dinners wrapped up and filed out into the night. The floor got quieter the way expensive restaurants get quiet late in the evening. Not empty, just settled, the energy dropping from performance to something closer to real. Emily was refilling water at table 12 when she felt it. She was being watched. Not the way Frank watched her, calculating exits, looking for weakness. This was different. This was the kind of attention that made you feel seen rather than exposed. She looked up. Daniel Moretti was looking at her from the corner booth, not quickly looking away when she caught him. Just looking. patient, direct. He gestured barely a small tilt of his chin toward the empty seat across from him. Every instinct Emily had developed in 7 months of keeping her head down told her to pretend she hadn't seen it. To refill the water glass, find something to do in the kitchen, run out the clock on her shift and go home. She crossed the room and stopped at his booth. "Can I get you anything?" she said. "Neutral? Professional?" "Sit down, Miss Carter." "I'm still on shift." "I know. Sit down anyway." She sat. Gag. Up close, he was harder to read than he'd seemed from across the room. The stillness wasn't cold, it wasn't warm either. It was the kind of stillness that comes from a person who has learned over a very long time how to control the space around them simply by controlling themselves. His eyes were dark brown. There were lines at the corners that hadn't come from laughing. "How long has he been doing it?" Moretti asked. Emily didn't pretend she didn't know what he meant. There wasn't room for that in this conversation. She could feel it. He wasn't the kind of man you performed ignorance for. "The fake charge is 3 weeks that I've seen, probably longer." "Which customers?" "Elderly. Solo diners mostly. People who might assume they misread the bill or feel embarrassed to complain." She paused. "Soft targets." Something moved in his expression. "Brief. Gone." "You've been writing it down," he said. Emily went very still. "What?" "The notebook you keep in your apron. You write in it between tables. You wrote in it tonight after you corrected the Henderson check." He watched her. "What's in it?" The question landed on her chest like something heavy. Because the notebook, her notebook, the one she carried out of habit and instinct, and a dead woman's voice telling her that silence makes you part of it, had in it 6 weeks of dates, table numbers, amounts, and names, nothing she'd ever planned to use. Everything she'd written, because she couldn't not. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. It was the worst lie she'd ever told, and she knew it the moment it left her mouth. Moretti looked at her for a long moment. Then for the first time, he almost smiled. "The notebook is important," he said. "More important than you know. And the man who grabbed your arm tonight knows you have it, even if he doesn't know what's in it." Emily's blood went cold. "How would he?" "Because you corrected that check. Because you called it theft to his face. Because you are the only person on the staff who has done either of those things in the last 3 months. He let that sit. He doesn't know exactly what you've recorded, but he knows you're paying attention, and that makes you a problem he needs to solve." She should have left, should have stood up, said goodnight, walked to the back, grabbed her coat, and never come back. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Who are you, Baon?" "Someone who's been watching this restaurant for a while," Moretti said. "You own it." Not a question. She'd figured that out from the way Frank had said his name, not just scared, but legally scared, the way people get when the person they're afraid of has paperwork over them. He didn't confirm or deny. He turned his wine glass once slowly. "What I'm going to tell you next," he said, "you need to hear completely before you decide anything. Can you do that?" Emily looked at him. She thought he stopped Frank Dawson with 2 words and a look. "He's been sitting in this corner booth since 7:15, and the entire staff has been pretending he isn't here, which means they're afraid of him and also trying to protect him from attention, which means they don't hate him. They're protecting him, which means whatever he isn't the enemy, at least not theirs." "Yes," she said. "Umpa." What he told her took 11 minutes. She counted. Frank Dawson was not operating alone. The false charges, the service enhancement fees, the premium handling additions, the phantom gratuities were part of a structured, skimming operation that had been running for 14 months. The money didn't go to Frank. Not all of it. Frank was a middleman. The architect was Ryan Blake, a corporate investor who held a silent partnership stake in 7 restaurants across the city through a management company with 3 shell layers between his name and the liability. Bellinati was the cleanest of them, the most prestigious, the most visible, and that made it the most important piece of the operation. High-end fraud leaves smaller footprints. Wealthy diners don't scrutinize checks. Elderly solo diners especially. "He's been building toward something larger," Moretti said. "A real estate deal, the kind that needs clean capital behind it, and a lot of it. The money from these restaurants is funding that. If the deal closes, the paper trail, gets buried under 3 corporate layers and a property transaction. He paused. We have approximately 3 weeks before that happens. Emily's brain was doing things it hadn't done since college, organizing, categorizing, tracking, forward implications. She said, I've been building a case, but I'm missing documentation that predates my involvement. Contemporaneous records, witness records, not reconstructed ones. He looked at her, the kind that hold up. She understood then. All of it, the whole shape of it, at once. Her notebook, 6 weeks of dates, table numbers, amounts, names. You don't want to fire him, hon, she said slowly. You want to expose him. Publicly. In a way that can't be managed or buried. I want Ryan Blake to be standing in front of a camera, Moretti said, with nowhere to hide and no time to run. And Frank is a door, Ryan is the room. He met her eyes. But I can't open the door without someone who was inside. The restaurant was almost empty now, 2 tables left. The kitchen staff was starting cleanup. Emily could hear the low, familiar percussion of the end of a shift pots, the hiss of the dishwasher, someone's radio. She looked down at the table. She thought about Marcus. She thought about the hospital, about the look on his face the morning they'd told him he needed another surgery. Not scared, her brother never looked scared, just very, very tired of fighting the same fight. She thought about 7 months of keeping her head down, of nodding when things were wrong because wrong things were not her business, of wearing long sleeves. She looked up. He's going to come after me, she said. Frank, before you're ready, he's going to try to discredit me or scare me off or... Yes, Moretti said, simply, without sugarcoating it. And you can't protect me the whole time. No, Mia, he held her gaze. But you can protect yourself, if you let me show you how. Emily looked at the man across the booth, this still, careful, powerful man, with his untouched glass of Barolo, and his corner seat, and his 2 words that had stopped Frank Dawson cold. She thought about what her mother used to say. If you see something wrong and you stay quiet, you become part of it. She'd been part of it for 7 months. She was done. What do I need to do? She said. Die. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until much later, was that the moment she sat down in that booth, Frank Dawson had been watching from the kitchen corridor, and he had already picked up his phone. And the text he sent had not gone to Ryan Blake. It had gone to someone else entirely. Someone whose name Emily Carter had never heard. Someone who made Ryan Blake look like a minor inconvenience. The real problem wasn't Frank. It wasn't even Ryan. And it was already moving. Emily walked out of Bella Notte at 11:47 with her jacket pulled tight and her notebook pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The cold hit her face and she kept moving. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't give anyone watching something to read in your body language. Moretti had said that his last instruction before she stood up from the booth, 3 words, quiet and deliberate, walk out normally. She'd nodded like she understood, and then spent the entire coat check line trying to remember how a normal person walks when they've just agreed to help dismantle a fraud operation, run by people who had already demonstrated they weren't afraid to leave bruises. Her arm still ached. She'd checked it in the bathroom before leaving a dark band of purple, already forming above her elbow, 4 distinct pressure points where Frank's fingers had been. She'd photographed it with her phone, 7 photos from different angles, the way she'd once seen described in a legal article she'd read online during a slow morning shift. She didn't know why she'd remembered that. She was glad she had. She was 2 blocks from the restaurant when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Every rational instinct she had said, let it go to voicemail. Evaluate later. Don't expose yourself to anything you can't control on a dark street at midnight. She answered. Miss Carter. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, smooth, unhurried. You had an interesting evening. She stopped walking. Who is this? Someone who thinks you made a very poor decision tonight. A pause, and in that pause was something that wasn't quite a threat, more like the shape of one the outline designed to let her imagination fill in the rest. That old couple left a nice tip, I hear. Shame you won't be around to collect the next one. The line went dead. Emily stood on that sidewalk for 4 full seconds. Then she started walking again, faster this time, not running but close, and she called the number Moretti had written on the back of a Bella Notte receipt before she left. 2 rings. Someone just called me, she said the moment the line connected. Unknown number? They knew I was at the restaurant tonight. They knew about the Hendersons. A beat of silence. Are you still near the restaurant? 2 blocks north. Keep walking. Take the next left, not the right. There's a 24-hour pharmacy on Carver Street. Go inside, stay near the front counter. Another beat. I'll have someone there in 8 minutes. Who? But he'd already hung up. She took the left. The pharmacy was bright and empty and smelled like floor wax and plastic. A teenage cashier looked up from his phone and immediately lost interest in her. Emily stood near a display of reading glasses and tried to look like a woman who'd come in for cough drops, and not like a woman whose hands had only stopped shaking about 40 seconds ago. 6 minutes later, not 8, a woman walked in. Late 30s, dark coat, hair pulled back. She moved through the pharmacy with the unhurried efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything was, including Emily. She stopped 2 feet away and didn't make a production of it. I'm Nina, she said quietly. I work with Mr. Moretti. You're going to come with me. Where? Somewhere with better lighting and a deadbolt. She almost smiled. And coffee. You look like you need coffee. Emily looked at her for one long moment, measuring, calculating, running through every reason this could be a trap and every reason it probably wasn't. And then she followed her out. She didn't have much of a choice. And some part of her, the part her mother had built, already knew which direction this story was going to go. Forward. Always forward. Even when forward was terrifying, she went. So, Nina drove a gray sedan that was completely anonymous in every possible way, the kind of car that exists specifically to not be remembered. And she talked while she drove, not filling silence, but actually talking, giving Emily information the way someone gives a drowning person a rope steadily, without drama, expecting you to hold on. The phone call you got, Nina said, eyes on the road. That wasn't Frank. I figured, Emily said. Frank doesn't work that fast. He was still in the restaurant when I left. Right, that was someone further up. They monitor situations that affect their interests. Tonight qualified. She glanced over briefly. It means they're already tracking you, which is actually useful for us. Useful, Emily repeated flatly. It means they're scared of what you might have, which means your notebook is exactly what Daniel thought it was. Daniel, first name. Emily noted that. How long have you worked for him? She asked. Nina was quiet for a moment, not evasively, more like she was selecting the accurate answer rather than the easy one. Long enough to know he doesn't ask people for help unless he's certain they can handle what comes with it. She paused. He doesn't waste people. Emily absorbed that, didn't know entirely what to do with it, filed it. They pulled into an underground parking structure and took an elevator to the 14th floor of a building that had the quiet, impersonal competence of a place used for business rather than living. Nina led her to a corner suite with a table, 4 chairs, a laptop, and a coffee maker that had clearly been used recently. Moretti was already there. He'd changed his jacket. Otherwise, he looked exactly the same, that same controlled stillness, that same sense of a person who exists at a slightly lower temperature than everyone around them. He was standing at the window, not looking out of it, just standing near it, and he turned when she came in with the same economy of movement he seemed to apply to everything. Sit down, he said. Let's talk about what's actually in that notebook. She put it on the table. He didn't touch it. He looked at it. Walk me through it, he said. So she did. Every entry, dates going back 6 weeks, table numbers, amounts, the pattern she'd noticed, the way it was always elderly, customers, always solo, or couples, never large parties who might compare notes afterward. The way the charges appeared under vague labels. The way Frank always ran those particular checks himself, never delegating. She watched Moretti's face while she talked. It gave her almost nothing. But his eyes moved, tracking, connecting, and twice he looked at Nina, who was sitting to his left, with a laptop open, and something passed between them that Emily couldn't read. When she finished, the room was quiet. 9 incidents, Moretti said. That I documented. I think there were more before I started noticing. There were. He folded his hands on the table. We have financial records that suggest this operation has been running for 14 months. Frank's take is approximately 18 to 20,000. Ryan Blake's considerably more. He let that land. What you have, Emily, is documentation that places the fraud at the point of transaction. It's the difference between a paper trail and a witnessed account. Legally, it changes everything. She sat with that. The notebook she'd kept out of habit, out of a compulsion she'd never even examined. Just the need to write things down to make record of wrongness, because her mother's voice in her head demanded it had accidentally become evidence. What happens now? She asked. Now he said, we give them a reason to move. Nina turned the laptop around. On the screen was a photograph, a man in his 50s, well-dressed, photographed from a distance with a long lens. Silver hair, the comfortable authoritative posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where he was the most important person. Ryan Blake, Emily said. She'd never seen him before, but the name had a shape now. He's going to be at Bella Notte on Friday, Moretti said. A private dinner in the back room. It's being arranged as we speak. Not by him, he doesn't know it yet. He'll receive an invitation from a business contact he trusts proposing a conversation about the real estate deal. The contact will suggest Bella Notte specifically. Blake will agree because he's comfortable there. It's his operation. It feels safe. You're baiting him. I'm creating an occasion. He looked at her steadily. We need him on that property in that room where we can document the conversation, where Frank is present, where the connection between them is visible and undeniable. He paused. And we need something to shake Frank enough that he says the wrong thing on record. Emily already knew where this was going. She felt it settle over her like cold water. Not pleasant, not something she wanted, but clarifying. The kind of cold that makes everything sharp. You need me to go back, she said. Thursday shift. Your regular schedule. Nothing unusual. And Friday, Friday you work the back section. A pause. Close enough to that private room to matter. Far enough that no one thinks twice. Emily looked at the table. She thought about the bruise on her arm. She thought about Frank's face when he'd said my mistake, the rage underneath the compliance, perfectly controlled patient, the way dangerous things are patient. He knows I'm a problem, she said. After tonight, he'll be watching me. Yes, Moretti said, and that's exactly what we want. She looked up at him. You want him to come at me again. I want him to make a move he can't take back. Something in his voice had shifted, still controlled, but with an edge underneath, something that sounded almost like anger, though it was wrapped so tightly she nearly missed it. What he did tonight in front of 30 people, that's not new behavior. That's habitual. He believes there are no consequences for him. We need to let him keep believing that. He met her eyes. Until there are. Nina set a small device on the table. Rectangular, slim, the size of a stick of gum. The notebook stays home from now on, Nina said. We've photographed every page. The original stays somewhere safe, somewhere Frank Dawson cannot reach it. She tapped the device. This goes in your apron. It's a recorder. Passive, it doesn't need activation. Waterproof, transmits live to a receiver in the building. Emily looked at the device, then at Nina, then at Moretti. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't accusatory, just observational. Variations of it, he said. And the people who helped you before, did they end up okay? The questions sat in the air. Moretti didn't look away. Not all of them, he said. I won't lie to you about that. She'd expected a reassurance. The honest answer hit her harder and somehow made her trust him more. What's the risk to me specifically, she asked. Not generally to me. Frank makes a move before Friday. Someone pressures you to leave, loses your notebook, threatens something connected to you. He paused, and something in that pause told her he'd already thought through what connected to her, that he knew about Marcus. We'll have eyes on you, but there are gaps in coverage that are unavoidable. My brother, she said, is currently at Riverside Medical, 3rd floor room 318. He has 2 staff members on his floor tonight who are not hospital employees. He said it quietly without making it into a moment. He's been covered since 9 p.m. Emily went very still. She felt something move through her that she couldn't name exactly. It was too complicated. A mixture of gratitude and the slightly unnerving realization that this man had anticipated her vulnerability and moved to address it before she'd even asked, which meant he was either trying to take care of her or he had understood exactly how to make her feel safe enough to say yes. Maybe both. Maybe those weren't different things. Okay, she said. Okay, you understand, Moretti said. Or okay, you're in. She picked up the recorder from the table and held it in her palm. Both, she said. She didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, or not only from fear. more from the way the shape of things had changed. 12 hours ago, she had been a waitress with 3 jobs and a bruise she was already planning how to hide. Now she was something else, something without a clean name, and her brain kept trying to file that and failing. She lay on the couch in her apartment. The bed was Marcus's had been since he came home from the hospital, and she'd been sleeping on the couch for 4 months and had stopped noticing. And she stared at the ceiling and ran through everything Moretti had said. Frank was a door. Ryan was the room. But someone had made that phone call before she'd even made it 2 blocks from the restaurant. Someone further up. Someone who monitored situations that affect their interests. Moretti had called Ryan Blake the target, the architect, the room. But what was behind Ryan Blake? She fell asleep at 4:17 a.m. with that question unresolved and woke up at 7:03, with it still sitting there unchanged, patient. The first thing she did was check her phone. 2 missed calls from the same unknown number as before. No voicemails. She took a shower, got dressed, ate half a piece of toast because her stomach wasn't interested in the other half, and called Marcus. "Hey," he said on the second ring, and his voice had the texture of someone who'd been awake a while. Marcus was an early riser, even in a hospital bed. It was one of the things about him that had always driven her slightly crazy and made her love him absolutely. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Like a person whose body is trying to evict him. A pause. "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine," she said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Em?" He knew her too well. "What's going on?" "Nothing that isn't going to be okay," she said, and she made herself believe it hard enough that it came through in her voice. "I promise, just don't talk to anyone you don't know today. At the hospital. No strangers, no unexpected visitors." "You're scaring me." "Don't be scared," she said. "Just be careful. Can you do that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then you're doing something." "I'm going to work, Marcus. You're doing something important, and you're not telling me because you think I'll worry." She closed her eyes. 22 years old, and he still read her like a first-grade primer. "I'll explain everything when it's over," she said. "I love you. Em, I love you. Call me if anything feels wrong." She hung up before he could push further. Then she put her phone in her pocket, her recorder in her apron, and her notebook. Her real notebook. The original 6 weeks of dates and amounts and names into the locked box under her bathroom sink where she kept her brother's pain medication. Frank Dawson could tear her apartment apart. He wouldn't find it. Thursday's shift started at 4. She got there at 3:45. She restocked her station, updated the specials board, chatted with Carla from the kitchen about nothing in particular. Carla's daughter had a school play that weekend. Emily said she hoped it went well and meant it. She said goodnight to the lunch crew as they filed out. She smiled at the new hostess, Jade, who'd only been there 3 weeks and still looked slightly terrified of everything, and told her she was doing great. Normal, unremarkable, invisible. She was carrying the water to table 3 when Frank appeared from his office. She felt him before she saw him. That was a skill she'd developed over 7 months, a peripheral awareness of wherever Frank was in a room. The same instinct prey develops for predators, biological and not poetic at all. He watched her cross the floor. She could feel the weight of it. She set down the water glasses. She smiled at the table, an older gentleman dining alone reading a paperback, glasses pushed down his nose. She took his order. She wrote it on her pad. She walked back toward the kitchen, and she kept her pace steady, and she did not look at Frank Dawson. He fell into step beside her anyway. "You had quite a night last night," he said pleasantly. Conversational, like they were colleagues. "I corrected a billing error," she said. "That's part of the job." "Right." A pause. The walk continued. "Our guest last night, you spent some time with him. He asked me a question about the menu." "For 15 minutes. He was thorough," Emily said. Frank stopped walking. She stopped a half beat later because stopping at the same time would have looked rehearsed. "I want to be clear about something, Emily." He said her first name like it was something he was picking up and examining. "Mr. Moretti is a very private individual. He doesn't enjoy having staff make assumptions about his presence here. He's a guest. That's all." A beat. "You understand what I'm saying?" "Of course," she said. "He's a guest. I treat all guests the same." The smile that crossed Frank's face then was the kind that lives entirely in the muscles and has nothing to do with anything genuine. Good, he said. I knew we were on the same page. He walked away. Emily went into the kitchen, set her order ticket on the wheel, and stood at the pass for exactly 4 seconds, while her heart rate came back down to something human. Carla gave her a look from across the prep station, one of those wordless, knowing looks that women in difficult workplaces learn to exchange a whole conversation in a glance. Emily shook her head slightly. Carla turned back to her cutting board. 2 hours into her shift, table 6 ordered a bottle of wine. Emily went to the cellar to retrieve it. She was alone in the cellar for approximately 45 seconds before the door opened. It wasn't Frank. It was a man she didn't recognize. Mid-40s, compact with the particular blankness of someone who has learned to make themselves appear harmless. He held the door open casually, like he'd come down for something like this was accidental. "Miss Carter," he said. And that was when Emily understood completely, not theoretically, not as information she'd been given by someone else, but in her body and the base of her spine, that the thing she'd agreed to last night was real, that it had weight, that it could hurt her. She kept her voice level. "I don't know you." "No," he agreed, "you don't. I'm just here to tell you something." He glanced at the door behind him, almost theatrically casual. She thought the move of someone who wanted her to notice how easily he controlled the exit. "The notebook. Whatever you think it's worth, it isn't. And whoever told you otherwise is using you." "I don't have a notebook," she said. "Emily." And the way he said her name was different from Frank, not contemptuous, almost gentle, which was somehow much worse. "Go home after your shift tonight. Don't come back. We'll make sure your brother's medical situation is handled." She felt the floor shift under her. Not literally, but close. They knew about Marcus. They knew which hospital. They knew the bills. Someone had done homework. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, like he was acknowledging something, filing something, and he pushed the door open wider and left. Emily stood in that cellar for 30 seconds. She picked up the bottle of wine. She went back upstairs. She served table 6. She smiled. She took 3 more orders. She refilled waters. She did not go to the bathroom and cry, which was what every nerve ending in her body was suggesting she do. At 8:15, she slipped her phone out of her apron in the server quarter and typed a text to the number Nina had given her, 3 words. "They know Marcus." The reply came in 40 seconds. "Already handled. Stay in position. You're doing well." She stared at those last 3 words for a moment longer than was probably useful. Then she put her phone away, and she went back to work. Because the trap was set and Friday was coming, and Ryan Blake didn't know it yet, and neither did Frank Dawson. But Emily Carter did. And for the first time in 7 months, the silence wasn't survival, it was strategy. Friday came the way bad things always come, quietly and faster than you expected. Emily was awake by 5:30, which meant she hadn't really slept so much as performed the horizontal version of staring at the ceiling until the room got light. She lay there running the plan in her head the way you run your tongue over a loose tooth, compulsively unable to stop, half hoping to find something wrong with it and half hoping not to. The plan was straightforward. That was both its strength and the thing that kept her up at night, because simple plans have fewer moving parts to break, but also fewer places to hide when something goes wrong. Ryan Blake would arrive at Bellinati at 8 p.m. for a private dinner in the back room. The invitation had come from a man named Gerald Foss, a commercial real estate broker who had a genuine professional relationship with Blake and who Emily now understood had been quietly cooperating with Moretti for reasons she hadn't been given and hadn't asked for. Blake believed this was a preliminary conversation about financing a friendly dinner between 2 men who had done business together before. He would be relaxed. He would be comfortable. He would be on his own territory. Frank would be managing the floor. Frank always managed the floor on Friday nights. It was his best shift, highest tips, most visibility, the shift where he felt most in control. Emily would work the back section. The recorder in her apron would be live from the moment she walked in. And somewhere outside, in vehicles and positions she hadn't been told the specifics of, Moretti's people would be waiting, along with 2 journalists from an investigative outlet whose editor had apparently been sitting on pieces of this story for 8 months, waiting for exactly the kind of documented, witnessed, airtight evidence that a waitress with a 6-week notebook had accidentally been building. That was the plan. She got up, made coffee, and called Nina at 6 a.m. "I need to know something," Emily said without preamble. "Good morning to you too," Nina said. She sounded fully awake, which meant she probably hadn't slept either. Or she was the kind of person who was constitutionally incapable of sounding groggy. Emily hadn't figured out which yet. The man in the cellar last night, compact mid-40s, completely unremarkable face. He knew about Marcus. He offered to handle the medical bills if I walked. We know who he is. That's not what I asked. Emily set her coffee down. He wasn't scared. He was calm. Not aggressive, not threatening calm. Like someone who delivers messages for a living and has never once seen one fail. She paused. That tells me whoever sent him isn't worried about this plan, which means either they don't know about it or they know about it and they're not worried, which is worse. A longer pause this time. You should have been a lawyer, Nina said. Nina? He's a fixer, Nina said. His name isn't important right now. What's important is that he was sent to assess you, not threaten you. If they wanted to threaten you, last night would have looked different, and they wanted to know if I'd take the offer. And you didn't, which tells them you have backup, which makes them cautious. A beat. Cautious is good. Cautious people make conservative moves. They pull back, they reassess, they don't do anything dramatic. Or they do something dramatic before we're ready, Emily said. Nina didn't answer immediately. That half-second of silence told Emily everything she needed to know about whether this possibility had already been considered. Be at the restaurant by 4, Nina said finally. And Emily, the recorder stays on from the moment you leave your apartment, not from when you arrive, from when you leave. The line went dead. Emily looked at her coffee, then she picked it up and finished it standing at her kitchen counter because sitting down felt like something she didn't have the right to do right now. She had 9 hours. She used them. She visited Marcus at 10, kept it short, kept it light, watched him watch her. The way he always watched her when he knew she wasn't telling him everything and was deciding whether to push. He decided not to push. He just held her hand for a moment when she stood to leave and said, "Be careful, Em," in the voice of someone who meant it more specifically than the words. Always, she said. She meant it more specifically too. She got to Bellinade at 3:58. The Friday evening shift had a different energy from Thursday, more anticipatory, more loaded. The lunch crew was just finishing breakdown, and the dinner staff was arriving in overlapping waves, the organized chaos of a handoff. Emily changed into her work clothes in the staff bathroom, clipped the recorder inside the lining of her apron, where it sat flush and invisible, and came out onto the floor. Frank was already there. He was standing at the reservation desk reviewing the evening book, and he looked up when she came out and he smiled. It was the most frightening thing she'd seen all week, because it was genuine. Not the flat, controlled smile he'd given her on Thursday. This was something that looked almost like warmth, almost like relief. The smile of a man who had been told good news. "Emily," he said pleasantly, "you're in the back section tonight. Private event room adjacent. Should be a light evening for you, oh." "Perfect," she said. She meant it differently than he did. For the first 3 hours, nothing happened. That was the hardest part. Emily worked her tables with the mechanical, practiced ease of someone who had done this enough times that her body could run the job while her brain did something else entirely. She smiled. She recommended the sea bass. She opened wine and described appetizers and kept the water glasses full and the atmosphere warm, and the whole time the recorder sat in her apron and the plan moved forward in its invisible, patient way, and there was absolutely nothing for her to do except wait and try not to look like someone who was waiting. At 7:45, Ryan Blake arrived. She knew it wasn't from seeing him. The back room had a separate entrance and she wasn't positioned to see who went in. She knew it because Frank straightened. That was the tell. He was across the restaurant talking to the hostess, and something in his posture changed the way the wire changes when current runs through it, a barely perceptible shift, a sudden new tension here, and then immediately controlled. He said something to the hostess, excused himself, and moved toward the back of the restaurant with the walk of someone who had somewhere important to be and was trying not to show how important. Emily cleared a table. She collected the dishes. She went to the kitchen. She came back. 8:03 p.m. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. Not a text, just a buzz, the signal Nina had established. One buzz meant in position. Two would mean abort. One buzz. Okay, okay, she breathed. At 8:20, Jade, the hostess, appeared at her elbow, wide-eyed and slightly pale in the way she'd been slightly pale since her first week. Table 12 asked for the manager, she whispered, but I can't find Frank. I'll handle it, Emily said automatically. Are you sure it's supposed to be? I've got it, Jade. She was already moving. Table 12 was a couple in their 60s who had found a hair in their appetizer and wanted an apology and a replacement, not a confrontation. Emily apologized genuinely, replaced the dish, comped the appetizer, and had them laughing about something else within 4 minutes. It was the kind of small human problem-solving she'd always been good at, the reason she was actually excellent at this job, even if the time had never felt like a destination. She was heading back to the server station when she heard Frank's voice, not from the dining room, from the corridor that led to the back event room. She stopped. She couldn't hear the words, just the register of his voice elevated slightly above his normal controlled range. Something had shifted. He was managing something that wasn't going according to plan. She stepped closer, not into the corridor, just near the edge of it, in the natural shadow of the coat check alcove, where she had a legitimate reason to be if anyone asked. Now she could hear words. Frank's voice told you it was handled. She doesn't have anything usable. Another voice lower. You said that on Thursday. Tonight I'm hearing different. Frank again dropping lower. Blake, listen to me. Don't say my name. Sharp. Controlled. The voice of a man who had not built a 14-month fraud operation by being careless. The girl, does she know anything real or not? She has a notebook. Frank's voice had lost something, the confidence, the ease. What was left was the voice underneath the one Emily had heard for a moment when Moretti said, let her go. But the notebook is circumstantial. It's waitress notes. It doesn't connect to you. It connects to you, which means it connects to Joe. It connects to me through you and Frank. I am aware of the architecture of my own operation. A pause that had texture. The question is what she's done with it, who she's talked to, because I'm told she didn't take the offer last night. Emily pressed herself back slightly. Her heart was doing something complicated, but her breathing was steady. She was surprised by that. She hadn't known until right now that she had this kind of stillness in her. Maybe she'd always had it. Maybe she'd just never been asked for it before. I'll deal with her tonight, Frank said. After close. You'll deal with her the way you dealt with her Tuesday in front of 30 witnesses. That was a mistake. Several things have been mistakes, Frank. The low voice was frighteningly even. Get it done quietly. No more mistakes. Footsteps. Emily moved. Smooth fast toward the server station, picking up a water pitcher on the way, so that she was already in motion and already doing something purposeful by the time Frank came back around the corner into the main dining room. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. And for one terrible second, she saw it on his face, the decision that had already been made. The thing he was planning for after close. She kept walking. In the kitchen, away from the line, she pulled out her phone and typed to Nina. Frank told Blake he'll deal with me tonight after close. Blake confirmed connection. Conversation recorded. The reply came in 20 seconds. We heard it live. Don't change anything. Keep working. You're almost there. She stood at the pass and stared at the ticket wheel and thought, almost there. 2 more hours. Less maybe. And Frank was going to spend those 2 hours watching her work and planning what he was going to do to her when the restaurant emptied out, and she was going to spend those 2 hours knowing exactly what he was planning and smiling and serving and pretending. She was so tired, not physically, that she could handle. It was the emotional cost of performance, of being afraid and appearing calm, of knowing and pretending not to know, of holding everything in, because the moment she let any of it show, the whole thing collapsed. She went back out to the floor. She served dessert to table 7. She opened a second bottle of wine for table 9. She told the couple at table 4 that the creme brulee was worth it and watched them decide, and felt a genuine small warmth at the fact that she could still mean something like that and feel something like that in the middle of all this, that the ordinary human commerce of a good meal still had weight. At 9:45, the signal came. Not her phone this time. Something else, a change in the quality of the air near the front of the restaurant, a movement at the entrance that she caught in her peripheral vision, and then the sound of the main door opening with the particular weight of multiple people entering simultaneously. She turned. Two men and a woman moving fast and purposeful through the dining room in the way that people move when they've been given access and they're using it immediately. The woman had a press badge clipped to her jacket. One of the men was carrying equipment, not heavy compact, the kind of thing you can move with quietly if you know what you're doing. The remaining diners looked up. There was a murmur, and then the back room door opened. Gerald Foss came out first. His face was the face of a man who had spent the last 90 minutes keeping a very important person calm while knowing the floor was about to drop out from under them, and it showed. Behind him, Ryan Blake. Blake was 62, silver-haired, the kind of man who had spent so long being the most powerful person in any given room that he'd forgotten what it felt like not to be. He came through that door with his chest forward and his chin up in the complete, unchallenged confidence of someone who owned this territory. He stopped when he saw the journalist. He stopped so completely, so absolutely, that the 2 steps of deceleration looked like a physical law being violated. "Mr. Blake." The woman with the press badge, clear professional, carrying a recorder of her own. "I'm Lauren Mercer with the Tribune. I'd like to ask you about the service enhancement fee scheme operating across 7 restaurants, including this one funded through your shell company, Trident Management Solutions." The room was very quiet. Ryan Blake's face did something complicated and rapid, a flash of white-hot fury, then calculation, then the return of the controlled mask, all of it in about 2 seconds. "I don't know what We have 14 months of financial records," Lauren said. "We have documentation of individual transactions, and we have a witnessed account from a member of this restaurant's staff." She didn't look at Emily. "Would you like to comment?" Blake turned. He turned the way someone turns when they are looking for a specific person, not confused, not scanning, looking. He found Frank Dawson, and Frank Dawson's face in that moment was the most honest it had probably been in years. There was nowhere for the performance to go. The mask had nothing left to perform for. "You told me this was handled," Blake said, not loudly, quietly, the quietest kind of fury. "Ryan, you told me she had nothing." His voice was still low, still controlled, but it had the specific vibration of a structure before it fails. "You told me the notebook was circumstantial." "It was," Frank said. "It is. I don't know how, Mr. Dawson." Lauren Mercer had turned to Frank with the same professional steadiness. "Were you aware that the service enhancement fees collected at Bella Notte were being reported to Trident Management Solutions as operational revenue?" Frank's mouth opened. Nothing came out. It was the first time Emily had ever seen Frank Dawson with nothing to say. It should have felt like a victory. It felt like watching someone fall off a building in slow motion, not satisfying, just awful and inevitable and real. "Were you paid directly by Trident?" Lauren continued, "or through an intermediate account?" "I'm not answering that," Frank said. The mask had come back, but damaged the kind of mask that still covers the face but no longer covers anything. "I want a lawyer." "You're not under arrest, Mr. Dawson," Lauren said. "You're free to leave." He didn't leave. He stood there. Because leaving would have been an admission in its own way, and even now, even with everything collapsing, Frank Dawson could not make himself walk away from a room where he might still have some control. Emily watched all of it from behind the server station. Her hand was resting on the counter. She wasn't performing anything anymore. She was just watching. And then something happened that she hadn't expected. Blake turned again, not toward Frank this time, not toward Lauren. He turned toward the corner of the room toward the east side, the shadow near the back, and his expression changed, recognition. Something that might have been hatred, or might have been the more complicated thing that lives next to it. Moretti was standing there. Emily didn't know when he'd come in. He was simply there, still watchful, the same person he always was, the same controlled temperature, the same eyes that missed nothing and showed only what he chose to show. "Daniel," Blake said, just the name, nothing else. "Ryan," Moretti said. The two men looked at each other across the dining room of a restaurant that Blake had been stealing from, and Moretti had been watching, and the weight of whatever history lived between them was so present in that silence that the journalists and the remaining diners and Frank and everyone else in the room all seemed to feel it without understanding it. "You set this up," Blake said. "It wasn't a question. You set this up, Moretti said. 14 months ago, I just waited for the right person to help me prove it. Blake's jaw tightened. I'll have my attorneys. You'll have your attorneys do exactly what attorneys do, Moretti said. But the records are filed, the account trails are documented, and the Tribune publishes tomorrow morning, regardless of what your attorneys do tonight. A pause. You built something on other people's trust, Ryan. It was going to fall eventually. It fell tonight. Blake stared at him, then he looked away. It was the smallest gesture in the room. A man looking away. But Emily understood what it meant, had understood it the moment it happened, because she had watched Frank Dawson's mask come back damaged, and now she was watching Ryan Blake's come off entirely. He called his attorney. He walked to a corner of the room and spoke in a low, rapid voice with his back to everyone, and Lauren Mercer's colleague photographed him doing it, and the flash was small and quiet and entirely final. Emily became aware that her legs were shaking, not from fear. From the release of 72 hours of held tension from Thursday afternoon to this moment, the way a rope shakes when the weight it's been bearing is suddenly lifted. She sat down on the step behind the server station. Just for a moment, just long enough to let her body catch up with the fact that the worst part was over. Carla from the kitchen crouched down next to her. She didn't say anything. She put a glass of water in Emily's hand and stayed there. Emily drank the water, then Nina was beside her, materialized from somewhere, the way Nina always seemed to materialize, crouching at her level, voice low. You okay? No, Emily said honestly. Then yes, I don't know. She looked up. Did we get everything? Every word, Nina said. The live feed from your recorder got Frank confirming Blake's involvement. The financial documentation was filed with the DA's office 2 hours ago. She paused. It's done, Emily. Emily sat with that. Done. She didn't feel what she'd expected to feel. She didn't feel triumphant or vindicated or light. She felt the way she imagined you feel after a very long surgery, empty, tender, aware of every single place that had been under pressure and now wasn't. She felt mostly tired. And then across the room, she heard Blake say something sharp into his phone, and Frank turned toward the door with the particular posture of a man who has realized there is no longer any point in staying, and Lauren Mercer say clearly and into her recorder, Mr. Dawson, one last question. And Frank walked out, into the cameras that were waiting outside. She didn't see it. She heard it, the sudden brightness of flashbulbs filtered through the restaurant's front windows, the rapid overlap of questions from people she didn't know, and Frank Dawson's voice saying no comment, no comment, no comment, into a night that was no longer quiet. She sat on that step behind the server station, and she heard it. And for the first time in 72 hours, she breathed. Not a performance, not a strategy, just air moving in and out of a body that had carried more than its share and was still somehow standing. The morning the Tribune published, Emily was standing in a laundromat on Carver Street, watching her clothes spin and reading the article on her phone with the particular numbness of someone who has lived through an event and is now watching it become a story. The headline was clean and direct: corporate investor exposed in multi-restaurant fraud scheme, 14 months of systematic theft targeting elderly diners. Lauren Mercer's byline, 3 columns, a photograph of Ryan Blake walking to his car the night before a phone pressed to his ear. Jaw set the posture of a man who has not yet fully accepted what is happening to him. A smaller photograph in the corner, Frank Dawson, mid-stride, one hand up against the camera's face half obscured, looking smaller than he did in person. That surprised her. She'd spent 7 months building him up into something enormous in her head, and in that photograph, he just looked like a man who had run out of exits. She read the entire article. Then she put her phone in her pocket and watched her clothes spin for a while. She felt hollowed out in a way she hadn't expected. Not bad, just empty, like a house after furniture's been moved. The shape was still there, the walls still solid, but everything that had been filling up the space for 72 hours was gone, and what was left was a kind of ringing quiet. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. I just read it, he said, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard in months. Not the managed cheerfulness he performed for her benefit, not the patient exhaustion of someone grinding through recovery. Something alive, something urgent. Emily, the article, the waitress, the notebook, that was you. She hadn't confirmed it, hadn't denied it either. She told him the night before that something was going to happen and he needed to be ready for noise. But she hadn't told him the specifics, and Lauren had honored the agreement they'd made. No name, no identification of the staff member, just her role and her evidence. Marcus, don't Marcus me. Was that you? She closed her eyes. The laundromat was warm and smelled like detergent, and somewhere a machine was making a rhythmic clicking sound. Yes, she said, that was me. He was quiet for so long that she opened her eyes and checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. He said finally, and his voice had gone rough. You did that while I was in the hospital. You were safe. I had people. I'm not upset about the safe part. He stopped, started again. You've been protecting me for 4 years. 4 years of 3 jobs and no sleep, and never once complaining, never once saying this is too much. And then you go and do this. This enormous thing. Another pause. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have worried. I'm always worried about you. More, she said. You would have worried more. He laughed, then a short, fractured sound that might have also been something else. You're unbelievable. You know that you are genuinely unbelievable. She felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been tight for a long time. Maybe not just 72 hours, maybe longer. I know, she said. Are you okay? I'm in a laundromat. That's not an answer. It's the most honest one I have right now, she said. I'm working on okay. He told her he loved her. She told him she loved him. She hung up and went back to watching the spin cycle, and the ringing quiet in her chest held something new. Now, not emptiness, something warmer, and she let herself sit with it. She got a call from an unknown number at 10:43. She answered it on the second ring because unknown numbers had lost most of their power to frighten her in the last 3 days. Miss Carter, a voice she recognized. The fixer, the compact mid-40s man from the cellar. She sat up straighter. I want you to know something. How did you get this number? The same way I got your brother's room number, he said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard in the cellar. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of flat honesty that felt less like threat and more like assessment. I'm good at my job. That cuts both ways. What do you want? To tell you something that didn't make the Tribune article. A pause. Blake's attorney filed a motion this morning to suppress the financial documentation. Standard move, he's buying time while he structures a deal. He'll cooperate on some level, give the DA enough to feel satisfied, and he'll walk with 18 months at a minimum security facility and emerge with most of his assets intact. A beat. That's how it works for people like him. She felt the warmth in her chest recede. Then what was the point of... I'm not done, he said, and his tone was patient. The Tribune article has been picked up by 4 national outlets as of this morning. The story is out of the DA's hands now. Public pressure changes the architecture of a deal significantly. And there are 6 other jurisdictions where Trident Management operated, 2 of which have been waiting for exactly this kind of documented case to open their own investigations. Another pause. What you did last night didn't just close a door, it opened 6 others. Emily was quiet. Why are you telling me this? She asked. A long silence. Because I was sent to stop you, he said. And you didn't stop. I thought you should know what that bought and what it bought. The line went dead. She sat in the laundromat with her phone in her hand, and she thought about 6 doors opening and about 14 months of soft targets who'd gotten charges they couldn't explain, added to bills they'd trusted, and about the specific expression on Mr. Henderson's face when he'd put on his reading glasses and frowned at a number that didn't belong. She felt something that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite peace, something more complicated, more real. Something that might, given time, become both. Her laundry finished, she folded it and went home. Nina called at noon. How are you holding up? People keep asking me that. People keep asking because they genuinely want to know. That's different from small talk. Nina's voice had the same efficient directness it always had, but under it, there was something Emily was starting to recognize, a warmth that Nina carried the way some people carry keys, practical, and always present, not something she made a production of. Daniel would like to meet with you this afternoon if you're able. The word afternoon had a different shape now than it had 3 days ago. This afternoon was not a tactical debrief. It was not preparation for something dangerous. It was just afternoon, the ordinary kind. Sure, Emily said. Where am I? It was the same building as before, the 14th floor, but the suite felt different in daylight, less operational, less a pause where plans get made, more just a room with good light and a coffee maker that someone had recently used. Moretti was at the table. No laptop this time, no files, just 2 cups of coffee and the particular quality of a person who is not waiting for anything. Nina was there too, but only briefly. She said something to Moretti. In a low voice, he nodded and she left. The door closed. Emily sat down. She picked up the coffee because it was there and because her hands wanted something to do. I read the article, she said. Everyone did, he said. The fixer called me this morning. Something moved in his expression. I know. I didn't arrange that call. I know you didn't. He looked at her for a moment. What did you make of it? He was giving me a realistic picture, she said. Blake will probably negotiate down, walk light. That's how it goes. She paused. But the story is out. The other jurisdictions, the public record. She looked at her coffee. It's not everything, but it's something real. Yes, Moretti said. It is. She looked up at him. In the daylight, away from the restaurant, away from the pressure and the planning and the performance of the last 3 days, he looked like what he actually was, a man in his 50s who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was still carrying it just differently. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Blake said your name like he knew you, not like you were a business contact, like history. She held his gaze. What is that? The silence that followed was measured, not evasive, more like he was choosing how much of an accurate answer to give. Ryan Blake and I were involved in the same real estate development 12 years ago, he said finally. A mixed-income housing project. He was the financing partner. I was the property holder. A pause. The project was intended to provide affordable housing in a neighborhood that needed it. Blake restructured the financing midway through. The affordable units became market rate. The families who'd been promised housing were displaced. He stopped. He made significantly more money. The families found somewhere else to go. And I've known for 12 years that my name is attached to something that was used as a tool for exactly the opposite of what it was built to do. Emily sat with that. So this wasn't just about Bella Notte, she said. It was never just about Bella Notte. Why now? Why this way? Because 3 months ago, his real estate deal would have buried the last paper trail connecting him to that project, Moretti said. And because I needed a witness, someone inside, someone whose documentation would stand up. He met her eyes directly. I've been watching Bella Notte for months. I've seen 3 other staff members notice what Frank was doing. Every one of them decided the risk wasn't worth it. He paused. And then you said the words, that theft, out loud to a man who had 30 pounds on you and the power to end your career. And I thought, there she is. Emily set down her coffee cup. You were waiting for me, she said. I was waiting for someone like you, he said. I didn't know it would be you specifically until that moment. She absorbed that, the weight of it being the person someone had been waiting for without knowing it, without choosing it, just being in the right place with the wrong amount of silence. Moretti, she said. Daniel, he said. She looked at him. Daniel, what happens to the restaurant? He was quiet for a moment. Frank is suspended pending investigation. The DA will move on formal charges within 2 weeks. That timeline is solid regardless of Blake's deal. The restaurant continues to operate. A pause. It needs a new management structure, new policies, someone who understands what this staff has been through. The staff, she said, and she meant Carla, who had put a glass of water in her hand, and Jade, who had only been there 3 weeks and still looked scared of everything, and the busboy who'd looked up when Daniel said, let her go. All of them who had seen and known and said nothing, not because they were bad people, but because silence was survival, and they each had a version of Marcus, a reason they couldn't afford to lose. They were never the enemy, she said. No, he said, they weren't. They need to be protected. Whatever comes next, the investigation, the press, they followed the rules that they were given. That's not the same as choosing what was happening. Moretti looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, and then almost smiled, the same almost smile she'd seen in the booth that first night, the one that showed up when she said something he hadn't anticipated. Agreed, he said. She looked out the window. Not at anything specific, just the need for a moment of not being looked at while she thought. 7 months of keeping her head down. 3 dumbs. A notebook she'd kept out of habit. One sentence that cost her an arm bruise and changed everything. She thought about the fixer's voice, 6 other jurisdictions, 6 doors. She thought about the families displaced 12 years ago by a financing restructure they'd never been told about. People who'd been promised something and received something else, who'd been treated as acceptable losses in an equation they weren't allowed to see. She thought about Mr. Henderson and his reading glasses. "I need to say something," she said. She turned back from the window. "Say it." "I'm grateful for the protection, for the plan for Marcus being covered before I even had to ask." She held his gaze. "And I also need you to understand that I didn't do this for you. I didn't do this for your 12-year history with Blake, or for the corporate case, or for the other jurisdictions." A pause. "I did it because an old man with reading glasses got $300 stolen from him and was too embarrassed to make a fuss about it. And because I couldn't be quiet about that." Moretti held her gaze for a long moment. "I know," he said. "I just needed to say it." "I know that too." She picked up her coffee again. "Okay." They were quiet for a moment, not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that has room in it. "The staff," Emily said. "You said the restaurant needs new management structure." "I did." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said carefully, "about someone who knows how a restaurant actually works from the inside, who knows what the staff has been through, who understands that the problem wasn't the people, it was the system they were put in." He paused. "Someone with a demonstrated ability to keep records under pressure." Emily looked at him. "I'm a waitress," she said. "You're a waitress who built an evidence portfolio that held up under legal scrutiny," he said, "and who negotiated the protection of her brother before agreeing to anything, and who in the middle of everything still apologized to a couple at table 12 about their appetizer and made them laugh." A beat. "You have a management degree you haven't used." She went very still. "How do you know that?" "Nina," he said simply. "Of course, Nina." "I used the money from it to cover Marcus's first surgery," she said. Flat. Just the fact. "I know." He set down his cup. "Emily, I'm not going to pretend this offer comes with no complication. You've been inside a difficult situation, and it's going to be in the news, and there will be people who have opinions about your choices. The staff will have feelings about the changes. Ryan Blake's attorneys will attempt to discredit every witness involved." He said it the way he said everything without softening it, because softening it would have been an insult. "What I'm offering you is not a reward. It's a job, a real one with real problems and real authority, and a salary that is not compatible with sleeping on a couch." She felt her chest tighten in a way that wasn't pain. "Marcus's therapy," she said, "will be covered under the employment package," he said. "Full medical, his facility, his doctors, his timeline." She felt the tightening spread. She was not going to cry in this meeting. She made that decision firmly and immediately, the way she made all decisions when she was actually certain about them. Fast, clean, no performance. "I need 24 hours, she said. "Take it." She stood up. He stood up because he was the kind of person who stood when someone stood, not as ceremony but as basic respect. "One more question," she said. "Yes." "The man who called me this morning, the fixer." She looked at him directly. "He's not a bad person, is he?" Moretti considered. "He's a complicated person," he said, "in a profession that makes people complicated. He could have made it worse for me. He chose not to." "Yes, he did." "People make choices," she said, "not as a philosophy, just as an observation, the kind that means more when it comes out of experience than out of theory." "They do," Moretti said. She left. She walked down 14 floors because the elevator felt like too small a space for the size of what she was carrying, and she came out onto the street and stood in the weak afternoon sunlight for a moment. Her phone buzzed. Not Nina, not Marcus, not an unknown number. It was Jade, the hostess. The text said, "I saw the article. I know you're the one. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been scared every shift for 3 weeks. I didn't know what to do. You did something. I don't know how, but you did." Emily read it twice. Then she typed back, You didn't do anything wrong. None of you did. That's over now. Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Are you coming back? Emily looked up at the building she just walked out of. She thought about Carla and the glass of water. She thought about the busboy who'd looked up. She thought about Jade 3 weeks in, scared of everything, learning the wrong lessons about what silence costs. She thought about what it would mean to go back, not as the person keeping her head down, but as the person who set the terms. She typed, working on it. Then she put her phone in her pocket and started walking. Not away from anything, toward. That was different. That was new. That was the thing. She was still learning the shape of the feeling of movement that has a destination rather than an escape. She walked for 6 blocks before she realized she wasn't thinking about Frank or Ryan Blake or the Tribune article or the DA's timeline. She was thinking about what she would say to the staff on the first day. Not a speech, not a policy statement, something simple, something real, something like, I know what it cost you to stay quiet. I know you were protecting yourselves and the people who depend on you. That wasn't weakness. That was survival. And this is what comes after survival. She didn't have the words yet. She had 24 hours. She walked and the afternoon moved around her, and somewhere across the city, Ryan Blake's attorney was filing motions, and 6 other jurisdictions were opening files, and Lauren Mercer was answering calls from 4 national outlets, and Marcus was reading the Tribune article for the second time in his hospital room, and Carla was prepping for a dinner service at a restaurant that was slowly, painfully becoming something different. And Emily Carter was walking without looking behind her, for the first time in years, just forward. She called Daniel Moretti at 7 the next morning and said yes before he could say hello. A pause, then, good. I have conditions, she said. I expected you would. The staff, all of them. Nobody gets let go because of what happened. Nobody gets punished for staying silent. They were surviving, not choosing. Any restructuring goes through me and I approve it. Agreed. Carla gets a raise. She's been doing the work of 2 people in that kitchen for God knows how long, and I guarantee she hasn't been compensated for it. Done. Jade gets a real training program, not the sink or swim version she's been getting, an actual onboarding process with clear expectations. Also done. A pause. Are you finished? One more thing. She stopped. This one was harder to say, not because she wasn't certain about it, but because it required admitting something about herself, about what she'd been, what she'd allowed, what 7 months of silence had cost her in ways she was only beginning to inventory. I want a transparent complaint process, documented, accessible to every staff member from day one. Not just a hotline that goes nowhere, an actual reviewed, responded to process. Because the reason Frank lasted as long as he did isn't just that he was careful. It's that there was nowhere for people to take what they knew. Silence on the other end, not the silence of disagreement, the silence of a man who is listening to something he considers important. Yes, Moretti said, build it however you think it should work. She exhaled. Okay. When can you start? She thought about 3 jobs, about the pharmacy counter on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, about the diner on 5th where the manager was actually decent and had covered her shifts without complaint for a week and deserved more than a text resignation. 2 weeks, she said. I have people to give proper notice to. 2 weeks, he agreed. And then with the closest thing to warmth she'd heard from him in their entire short history, Emily, you're going to be good at this. She didn't say thank you. She said, I know, and hung up. Then she sat on her couch, Marcus's bed, still technically, though she was already rethinking that arrangement, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she'd just agreed to for exactly 3 minutes. The fear, the uncertainty, the voice in the back of her head that had spent 23 years telling her she was someone who survived, not someone who led. She let all of it be real and present and fully felt. Then she stood up, made coffee, started writing the list of everything she needed to do. Old habit, new purpose. The 2 weeks that followed moved faster than she expected and slower than she could stand simultaneously, the way transition periods always do. She gave notice at the diner in person because the manager had been kind, and kindness deserves a face. He shook her hand and said he always knew she was going somewhere, and she believed him, even though she wasn't sure she'd known it herself. She gave notice at the pharmacy by phone because the manager there was not kind, and had never pretended to be, and a phone call was more than he'd earned. She spent 6 of those 14 days going back into Bellanote, not as an employee, yet not officially, but as someone who was learning what she was inheriting. She walked the floor at different hours. She sat with Carla in the kitchen during slow afternoon prep and listened without performing interest, just actually listening. She had a long conversation with Jade that started as an HR orientation and became something more honest. Jade telling her about the 3 instances in her first weeks where she'd seen something wrong and hadn't known who to tell, and Emily telling her that wasn't her failure, it was a systemic one, and watching the relief move through Jade's face like weather. She didn't see the busboy until the 6th day. His name was Antonio, 17 years old, working 20 hours a week to help his mother cover rent on an apartment 2 neighborhoods over. He'd been at Bellanote for 4 months. He was the one who had looked up when Daniel said, "Let her go." She found him during side work and sat across from him at an empty table and said, "I want to ask you something and you don't have to answer it." He looked at her warily. Teenagers in difficult circumstances develop a very particular wariness. The look of someone who has learned that adults asking non-mandatory questions usually want something. "The night in the dining room," she said, "when Mr. Moretti spoke, you looked up. Everyone else kept their eyes down, but you looked up." Antonio was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know, I wasn't supposed to," he said finally. And then more honestly, I did know, I couldn't not." Emily nodded. "That matters," she said. "What you did matters. I need you to know that." He looked at her like someone who had been told something true and is deciding whether to trust it. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. She moved on to the next table, the next thing on her list. But she carried that conversation with her for the rest of the day, turning it over. I couldn't not. How many times had she thought exactly that, standing at a reservation desk, telling Frank Dawson that's theft, sitting down in a corner booth with a powerful stranger, picking up a recorder that could have ended everything badly. I couldn't not. That was the thread. That was the thing that had been there all along, the thing her mother had put in her when she was small, and that no amount of survival mode silence had managed to extinguish. She couldn't not, and maybe that was enough of a foundation. The formal charges against Frank Dawson were filed 11 days after the Tribune article. She read about it on her phone during her last shift at the diner, sitting in the break room during a 15-minute lull between the breakfast and lunch rushes. Wire fraud, conspiracy, filing false business records. The DA's statement was measured and precise, the kind of language that is specifically designed not to promise more than it can deliver. And Emily respected that. She'd had enough of promises that outran reality. Blake's attorney had, as the fixer predicted, filed for a cooperation agreement. The details weren't public yet. They might not be for months. She had spent approximately 48 hours in a fury about that, about the math of it, about the way power protects itself even in collapse. And then she had decided, not without difficulty, that she couldn't let that fury consume the energy she needed for what she was building. The fury was legitimate. It was also expensive. She filed it somewhere she could access it when it was useful and tried not to let it run on idle. What she didn't expect was the letter. It arrived on the 12th day, an actual letter, physical, hand-addressed to her apartment in handwriting that was very careful and very old. She opened it at her kitchen counter. It was from Mr. Henderson. He wrote that he and his wife had seen the Tribune article, that they had recognized the description of the incident, the charge, the correction, the confrontation they had witnessed, and understood that the quiet young woman who had fixed their bill had been at the center of something much larger than a single dinner. He wrote that he had been a judge for 31 years before retiring, and that in 31 years he had learned to recognize the particular quality of someone who does the right thing, not because it's safe or strategic, but because they simply cannot do otherwise. He wrote, "My wife cried when she read the article. I told her it was good crying. She said she knew." He signed it with deep respect and gratitude. Arthur and Margaret Henderson. Emily read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and put it in the same locked box under the bathroom sink where she kept the notebook. Next to Marcus's medication. Next to the thing that had started all of this. She thought I kept that notebook because I couldn't not. Arthur Henderson read that letter because he couldn't not. Margaret Henderson cried because she couldn't not. Maybe that's how things actually change. Not through grand design, through enough people who simply cannot be otherwise. On her last night before officially starting the new job, she visited Marcus. He was doing better. The new round of therapy was showing results his doctors described as encouraging, which in medical language meant something close to real hope, and his color was better, and he was arguing with the physical therapist in ways that suggested he was getting his energy back. She sat with him for 2 hours, and for most of those 2 hours they talked about nothing important. A show he'd been watching, a book she'd been meaning to read, the food at the hospital, which was in his assessment, aggressively mediocre. She laughed more in those 2 hours than she had in the previous 2 weeks combined. As she stood to leave, he caught her hand. "Em," he said. She turned. He looked at her, really looked the way Marcus had always been able to look at her, the way that saw past whatever she was presenting to whatever was actually there. "You seem different," he said. "Different how?" He thought about it. "Like you're not bracing anymore." She felt that land somewhere deep. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think that's right." "Good." He squeezed her hand and let go. "That's good." She drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold. She needed to feel the air. The first day she walked into Bella Notte as director of operations, she was 20 minutes early. She hadn't planned to be. She just was. The restaurant was pre-service quiet, that particular quality of a place still becoming itself for the day. She walked the floor. She checked the reservation book. She went to the kitchen and said good morning to Carla, who looked up from her prep and gave her the same look she'd given her the night Emily sat on the step behind the server station, that wordless female, completely comprehensive look, and said, "Coffee's made." "Thank you," Emily said. "Don't thank me," Carla said. "Just make sure this place is worth working at." "That's the plan." She held her first staff meeting at 3 p.m. before the dinner service. Everyone was there, kitchen front of house, Antonio, with his busboy apron still half-tied, Jade standing at the back with a notebook, Carla with her arms crossed, but her posture open, two servers Emily didn't know well yet, but was going to. She stood at the front. She didn't have notes. She'd thought about what to say for 14 days and had finally decided that notes were the wrong instinct. Notes were a performance of authority, and she wasn't interested in performing authority. She was interested in actually having it, which meant starting from somewhere honest. "I know some of you know why I'm standing here," she said, "and I know some of you have complicated feelings about that. You saw things and stayed quiet, and now someone who did the same thing for 7 months is standing in front of you with a different title. I get that that's complicated." She let that sit. "I'm not going to tell you that what happened was okay or that silence is never the right call. Sometimes it is. You make the calls you can make with what you have, and none of you were wrong to protect yourselves." She paused. "What I'm going to tell you is that those calls are different now. Starting today, there is a formal process for raising concerns. It goes to me directly. It gets documented and it gets responded to within 48 hours. Not a hotline, not a suggestion box. Me. You can put your name on it or you can leave it anonymous. I'll take it seriously either way." She looked at the room. Nobody in this building should ever again be in the position of knowing something is wrong and having nowhere to take it. That's not a promise about perfection. Things will go wrong. I'll make mistakes, but the channel will always be open. That I can promise. The room was quiet. Then Carla uncrossed her arms. It was such a small thing, but Emily saw it and it meant everything. "Questions," Emily said. Antonio raised his hand, then seemed embarrassed about raising his hand, like it was too formal, too much like school. "Well, they keep coming in," he said. "The press, the people asking about what happened." "For a while, probably," she said honestly. "The investigation is ongoing. Blake's case is going to be in the news. If anyone contacts any of you directly, you don't have to say anything to anyone. That's your right. But if you have questions about what's happening legally, I'll tell you everything I'm allowed to tell you. You don't have to navigate it alone." He nodded, seemed satisfied. Or as satisfied as 17 with a lot of uncertainty can get. "Anything else?" Jade raised her hand. "The complaint process. Can you put it in writing? Like an actual document we can all have." "It'll be on the board in the break room by end of this week," Emily said. "And in your employee folders." Jade wrote something in her notebook. Emily felt a warmth for that, for the instinct to document, to make record, to keep the thing in writing so it can be returned to. She understood that instinct intimately. The meeting broke. The service began. And Emily Carter ran her first dinner service as Director of Operations at Bella Notte, which meant 100 small decisions made fast and mostly right, 2 crises averted before they became visible to diners, a server's medication error caught by Carla, and handled quietly a reservation conflict resolved by Emily personally with enough honesty and grace that the couple who'd been bumped left with a complimentary dessert and an apology they seemed to actually accept. At 9:30, during a brief lull, she stood at the server station and looked out at the dining room. It was full, quietly, comfortably full, the good kind tables of people genuinely engaged with each other, and with the food, no performance, just the real thing. Somewhere in the corner booth, the east corner by the window, a middle-aged couple was sharing a bottle of wine and a private joke, and the woman was laughing with her whole face. Emily watched them for a moment. Then Nina appeared at her elbow, which was startling because Nina was very good at appearing without warning. "Daniel wants to know if you have 5 minutes." "Tell him I have 2, Emily said. "I'm working." Nina's mouth did something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it. "I'll tell him that." Moretti came in through the side entrance that the staff used. He was in a dark coat, no tie as usual, and he looked at the dining room the way someone looks at something they built a long time ago and are seeing clearly for the first time. He stopped beside her at the server station. "How did it go?" he said. "Ask me in a month," she said. "Tonight was one night." "Fair." She glanced at him. "You're going to hover, aren't you?" "No," he said. And then after a beat, "Occasionally." "Daniel, I'll be in the corner booth," he said, "if you need anything." She looked at the east corner. The couple with the bishti had just finished the joke and were settling back into comfortable quiet, the kind of quiet that belongs to people who have known each other long enough to not need to fill every moment. "I won't need anything," she said. He moved toward the booth. She moved toward table 6, which had just flagged her down with the particular hand gesture of someone who had a question about the menu and needed another 30 seconds before they were ready to order. She got to the table. She smiled, not the practiced smile, the real one, the one that had always been there underneath the performance, the one she'd forgotten she had. "What can I do for you?" she said. 3 weeks later, Arthur Henderson called her office number. She had an office now small but real, with a door she could close, and asked very politely and with the careful dignity that seemed to characterize everything he did, whether she might be free for dinner the following Saturday. "My wife would like to meet you properly," he said. "Not as a waitress, as yourself." Emily sat back in her chair. "I'd like that," she said. She hung up and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and went back to the staffing schedule she'd been building because the dinner service didn't manage itself, and she had 3 new staff members starting next week, and the complaint process documentation still needed a final review before it went on the break room board. She worked for another hour. At 5:15, Marcus called. His voice had the new quality it had started carrying since the therapy results came back, lighter. Forward-facing, the voice of someone who had stopped quietly preparing to lose and started something else instead. "My PT says I might be walking unassisted by the spring," he said. He said might, but he also said it with this face like he was trying not to look too confident, which usually means he's pretty confident. Emily stopped typing. "Marcus," she said, and her voice did something she didn't entirely control. "Don't cry," he said immediately. "I'm not crying." "Your voice is doing the thing." "I'm at work," she said. "I'm not crying at work." "You are definitely about to cry at work." She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for exactly 3 seconds. Then she took it away and breathed. "That's wonderful," she said. "That is genuinely wonderful." "I know," he said, and she could hear him smiling through the phone, that full-face smile he'd had since childhood, the one that was too big for any room and had always embarrassed him and delighted everyone around him. "Hey, Em." "Yeah. Thank you for everything. For all of it." A pause. "I know you're going to say you didn't do anything." "I was going to say you're welcome," she said. He laughed. She laughed. When she hung up, she sat for a moment in the small office with the door she could close, and she thought about what it had cost her to get here and decided carefully and with full knowledge of the math that it had been worth it. Every bruise, every night on the couch, every moment of performed calm over genuine terror. Worth it. Not because the world had been fixed. It hadn't. Blake's cooperation deal was still being negotiated somewhere in a room she'd never see, and the other 6 jurisdictions were moving at the pace of institutions, which was its own kind of slow. And there would be other Franks and other restaurants and other soft targets sitting at table 9 with reading glasses and a confused frown. But 6 doors had opened. One staff had stopped flinching. One kid named Antonio had looked up when everyone else looked away, and now had someone to tell him that mattered. And one man with careful handwriting had written, "I learned to recognize the particular quality of someone who does the right thing, not because it's safe, but because they simply cannot do otherwise." She couldn't not. That had been the whole thing all along. She opened her laptop again. The staffing schedule needed finishing. The complaint documentation needed review. There was an email from a vendor she'd been meaning to answer and a note from Carla about a sourcing issue with a produce supplier that probably needed to become a larger conversation. The work was there. The work was always there. She rolled up her sleeves and without thinking about it, without even noticing she was doing it, she started from the top. Not a quiet girl who whispered anymore, just a woman who knew what she was doing and why and how much it was worth.